All righty. Hello, everyone. Let's get started. All right. Looks like we have a great group here. Welcome to today's webinar, Protect Neutral CAD Files Throughout Your Supply Chain. A few quick details before we get started. Today's webinar will be recorded, and we'll go ahead and share that with attendees tomorrow once we have the recording posted. Feel free to use the chat box or the Q&A section to ask questions throughout the presentation, and we'll try to answer those at the end or during if we can. I'd like to introduce our panelist for today, Prakash. He's our speaker. So Prakash is our Senior Director of Product Management here at Seclore. Prakash, why don't you go ahead and take it over from here and share today's agenda?
Thanks, Kevin. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good evening. People joining us from different parts of the world, and it's great to see so many names here in the participant list. Today's conversation is going to be around intellectual property security in the supply chain. Well, specifying the need for intellectual property seems to be a very obvious thing to do. But in today's conversation, I'll spend some time sharing some mind-boggling statistics around the impact of IP leakage, especially in manufacturing firms. Collaboration around IP has been a challenge, especially when it comes to CAD. While the ISO framework has solved that problem to an extent, but there are still security gaps which Seclore will help you fill up. So that's something that I'll be speaking about as well today. I'll take you through a case study and try to apply some of these capabilities into how multiple enterprises around the world are using Seclore to secure CAD, especially when it is shared in the supply chain. On demand, I'm also open to taking you through certain product visuals. This is something that I like to do in my webinars. But for that, I would definitely want you to specify in the chat if you want to take a look at the product visual at the end part of the webinar. So go ahead in your chat and write down product visuals in case you want to take a look at it at the later part of the webinar. All right, so let's begin. Intellectual property or IP security in the supply chain is a very common topic, or is a topic which is very obvious to understand the need for it and why enterprises really want to look at IP security. But if you look at the history, and especially the last 5 or 7 years, enterprises have transformed themselves post the COVID era, with enterprises focusing more and more on their core competencies and outsourcing anything that they are probably not the best. Suppliers and manufacturers around the world have taken up the mantle of additive manufacturing or manufacturing based on specific requirements done in a different part of the world altogether. And in this situation, OEMs or original equipment manufacturers end up sharing trade secrets to suppliers in the supply chain, to vendors, industrial designs, typically in the form of CAD, as well as the intellectual property that they receive from their customers. They pass it on to their suppliers as well. And in today's conversation, we will be focusing more on the CAD piece, but the capability of security applies to any other form or any other container of intellectual property as well. Enterprises or OEMs share thousands of CAD files with third parties every year. This is a legit requirement. Unlike internal collaboration, where enterprises expect employees to work on designs and share only with each other, and any external share is considered as a default, a fault, or an anomaly. In case of an external collaboration, these are legitimate needs to collaborate outside the network. And so DLPs or perimeter-based securities are usually out of the question here, because data has to go out. CAD files need to go out of the enterprise and have to be shared with suppliers and vendors. And as a result, this external collaboration requirement sends out CAD files, thousands of them every year, to the supply chain. Now, these files are shared in an unprotected manner typically. And why do I say that? It is because the suppliers who receive these files want to make sure that they are able to open up these files, work on them, and respond to the OEM's requirements as soon as possible. So any hindrance to this collaboration will impact the turnaround time. So OEMs end up sharing unprotected CAD files or intellectual property files to the suppliers, and this puts years and years of R&D at risk. The second most expensive cost for an enterprise, especially in the manufacturing domain, after personnel, is R&D. And just imagine the risk that any enterprise is taking, known risk, by sending out unprotected CAD files out in the open into the supply chain. Just to give you some statistics, almost 50% of the breaches involve the loss of intellectual property. And about 15%, that's more than 1/8, originate in the supply chain. So any breaches that originate in the supply chain, the OEMs have almost no control over where that intellectual property is flowing. They have, in fact, no visibility on who is sharing this information and to whom. And this becomes a big, big concern, especially in manufacturing sector, where intellectual property is the competitive advantage. So let's move on to the next section where we understand how CAD as a file format or as a construct or a container of intellectual property is collaborated on, and the progress that we have made through the years just to ease out collaboration and how security can be embedded in the same. So what you see on the screen is a list of common CAD applications across the world. This by no means is an exhaustive list. There could be hundreds of applications preferred by enterprises of different parts of the world based on geography, industry, sub-industry, and so on. And most of these CAD applications have their own native or proprietary CAD formats. This is great when enterprises are collaborating within themselves, employees are working on designs and sharing with each other. But the moment this interaction has to be across enterprises or to suppliers, the presence of so many file formats becomes a bottleneck and adds to the complexity. So let's take an example here. Majority of the supply chains and the sub-industry, manufacturing sub-industries in the world are not vertically integrated. What I mean by that is the vendors are not embedded into the OEM's manufacturing process itself. They're usually working outside, they're working in a non-integrated or they're not really close coupled. Now, in that situation, OEMs might be using a completely different set of CAD applications compared to the suppliers. So say in this example, we have an OEM who is using the Dassault framework, Dassault products. And let's consider an example here where they create a design in CATIA and they send it over to the supplier who primarily uses Siemens and Autodesk. Now, in this situation, the files or the designs shared by the OEM to the supplier would not open by default because these file formats are not compatible with each other. Now, this is not a new problem that I have been talking about. This problem has existed for a while, and it is not an unsolved problem as well. So about a decade and a half ago, the ISO standard came up with a specification of 10303, which forced or which guided all the OEMs and the suppliers to follow what is called as an externalization framework. This allows OEMs to transform the proprietary CAD formats to something called as a neutral CAD format, which is a standard defined by ISO. These formats can be consumed by any CAD application. This eased out the collaboration in a heterogeneous situation like this. So the OEM could work on CATIA, create a CATIA file, transform it to a step file, and send it over to the supplier. And the supplier could be using any CAD application. That CAD application would be able to import these step files, and they would be able to work on them. Completely transparent process, making it very easy for collaboration between the OEMs and the suppliers. This has been a game changer, especially in the industries like oil and gas, aerospace and defense, industrial manufacturing, architecture and construction engineering. This happens specifically because the value of the designs is huge, the production volume is typically low, and any design requires few weeks or sometimes even months to manufacture or build. This is what we observe in these sub-industries. Now, as soon as these step files enter into the supplier's network, the CAD applications would be able to transform them into their own native formats, and the suppliers could work on them, easing out any friction and making sure that the turnaround times and productivity is not really impacted. So the externalization framework or the process converted the native or a proprietary CAD formats to the neutral CAD formats. And this is what Seclore focuses on as well. Now, the neutral CAD formats definitely makes it easy for collaboration. It adds interoperability and also reduces the information that the suppliers don't need to see. However, it's not secure enough. They do not have any capabilities of tracking who is accessing these files, what's happening to them, where is the intellectual property flowing. And the next gap here is essentially being able to control who can have access to this information. So what Seclore is enabling enterprises to do through the security of neutral CAD is embed the layer of security within the neutral CADs, the ISO standard neutral CADs. This will enable enterprises to protect the hard-earned innovations, years and years of R&D that has created intellectual property, and ensure that the CAD files which contain intellectual property can be shared fearlessly within the supplier network. This helps enterprises to be able to track and protect intellectual property through these CAD files throughout the supply chain. Know who is accessing these CAD files beyond tier one suppliers. Identify trends on what are the attempts, what are the accesses, and what is the interaction that suppliers are having on those files. Are they sharing it with someone else? Are they breaking it down into smaller designs and sharing it to the next tier of suppliers? Are they trying to print it out? All this information can be tracked. Protection through AES 256 bit encryption. At the same time, having dynamic watermarking on the files helps to reduce the risk of data leakage. The dynamic watermarking, in fact, helps to also trace back to the source of leakage. So imagine a supplier or a malicious user really taking a picture through their mobile phone of a design on a CAD system and then circulating it worldwide. The dynamic watermark would help identify the source of leakage, the name of the person who's opened up the file, the domain or the ID where the file has been opened from can be used to identify where the leak happened. Real-time revocation of access helps take quick actions in case there is any notice of a breach. So if I, as an OEM, realize that there has been a breach reported somewhere in the supply chain, I could go ahead and revoke access of those files and they would not open up for any of those suppliers. There could also be a predefined calibrated expiry that I can set in, especially in scenarios where I've got project-based work. So I could have a project, say a supplier evaluation project in this case, where I share intellectual property out with a bunch of suppliers. And I understand that the last date of submission, say, is 25th of December. I can set a policy which says that the intellectual property cannot be accessed by anyone beyond the 25th of December, even if they have downloaded the file and stored it in some offline location. All this gives immense value to enterprises only when it can be automated into existing workflows. And that's what the Seclore SDKs really help to do. Integrate with PLM systems and PDM systems, collaboration system like SharePoint and Dropbox, which will automate protection as soon as this information is shared with someone externally. Existing investments in DLPs and CASBs and other security tools can be enhanced by integrating with Seclore, such that a DLP could identify that a CAD file is being shared externally and automatically invoke Seclore to protect this information before it goes out. So there are multiple options of securing information as they go out, multiple ways of embedding it into the enterprise ecosystem, and multiple ways to achieve scale and consistency of security. Now, I would like to talk to you about two case studies in this conversation. Now, in the interest of time, I will focus on one, which is the supplier evaluation use case. But I'll soon be setting up another webinar where I can talk about the second use case, which is a scenario where a tier one supplier receives an OEM's intellectual property and is in charge of safeguarding that intellectual property through the supply chain. So we'll focus on the first use case, which is a RFP use case or a supplier evaluation use case, as it is called. So a supplier evaluation use case, by definition, stands for innovation, stands for competitive advantage, because it is the R&D output or the prototype designs which are usually shared with suppliers for initial proposals. So right from the initial stage of innovation, where the design team comes up with a few prototypes, they would be reaching out to the supply chain team to request for RFPs and to get suppliers onboarded. Now, when this happens, the sensitive information, which is in the form of these designs, are shared with the supply chain team, who then raise RFP tenders and invite suppliers to supply quotes and timelines. This is a very time-sensitive activity, typically ranging between 8 to 22 weeks, median being 15 weeks. And large enterprises, and some of you who are here already know, because you are in that enterprise, either in the CISO team or in the supply chain team or the R&D team, 15 to 40 RFPs a year across different parts of the enterprise is common. This is a highly frequent activity, a high value activity. Now, when I look at it from the OEM's perspective, which is the majority of you here, you share sensitive IP with multiple suppliers. It could be designs, Excel files, PDFs. There are mutual NDAs that you sign, embedded confidentiality clauses in. But in many cases, the suppliers are operating in a different part of the world, in a different country, where enforcing laws based on the local jurisdiction becomes very, very difficult and expensive. So this is a challenge that many OEMs really face. Now, when I look at it from a supplier's perspective, especially in a less vertically integrated setup, suppliers work with multiple OEMs. They will break down requirements, create more CAD files, and share it downstream, which the OEMs may not really know about or be aware about. They're optimized for responding to RFPs. There are a lot of plugins, a lot of macros, a lot of applications built on top of these CADs to run some of these activities like coding and redlining. And there are many other stakeholders within the enterprise who would be working on some of this information. So having said that, and putting all the pieces of the puzzle together, a typical scenario would be where there is intellectual property lying in the enterprise's user repository or document repository. The PLM systems would be having these designs. An internal user, it could be the R&D team or the supply chain team, would extract this information out and share it with suppliers, multiple of them, in an RFP or a supplier evaluation workflow. In many cases, the suppliers would have access to the supplier portal where they would access this information by themselves. And this information gets passed on to the next tier and the following tier. And ultimately, it reaches to the last tier. During the RFP processes, all this information gets collected. There is an evaluation. And let's say one supplier wins the deal or is awarded the contract. However, in this entire workflow spanning 15 weeks, the intellectual property is in the environment of each and every supplier in the supply chain, from the tier one till the last tier. And even though supplier two has been awarded the contract, this information is with supplier one, their subcontractors, three, and so on. And many of these suppliers also work with your competition. So there is a chance of accidentally sharing some of this information with your competition too. And this is the use case which many of Seclore's customers are using this capability for. And I'm sure this is something which many enterprises who are not even using Seclore would definitely need a solution for. The two main gaps, the two main asks, especially from an OEM's perspective, is visibility into the supply chain. But not only a view of where the intellectual property is flowing, but how big is the supply chain? We have had scenarios where one of the largest automobile manufacturers that Seclore works with, before the setup of this solution, used to uh, realize that they had 6 tiers of supply chain. But once this capability was embedded into their workflow, it turns out they had 17 tiers, uh, and the rest was unknown or undocumented. And the objective is to not stop the sub tiers from accessing, but having the control to stop or to revoke access whenever needed. We spoke to more than 50 CISOs in the supply chain business. More than 40% of them came out with an opinion that they're not happy with the traditional methods of security. Traditional methods could be the standard training and awareness, password protection, and encryption. The core concern that we heard, especially in the traditional forms, is that it just slows down performance. If I encrypt my disk, it's going to take time for me to open up these files, work on them. I really cannot afford doing that as a supplier. Uh, Control in the storage or the collaboration platforms could be not allowing downloads or link expiry. Usually are seen as ineffective because suppliers need to download these files to put them into their workflow and to do their work better. Passwords need to be shared with the recipient so that they are able to access those files. Link expiry, once the document has been downloaded, link expiry doesn't really help. So these traditional methods are not seen as valuable enough. And there are certain security capabilities which come in with the CAD application or the PLM systems, but they are seen as very specific to those applications. And the security seems to get exhausted as soon as that information comes out of the PLM system. Out of the box solutions typically don't tend to work, and long implementation cycles were the other concerns. And this is where Seclore's design security comes into the picture. Focusing towards specific sub-industries in manufacturing, Seclore's security on CAD focuses on interoperable or the neutral CAD formats. And the USP of interoperable CAD formats is collaboration across multiple applications of CAD, which is what Seclore also enables and enforces security on. Now, I would like to take a pause here and just get a view from all of you here in the audience on the use of interoperable or neutral CAD formats in your collaboration with the supply chain. So it'll be great for you to just type in case you're aware of what could be the typical file formats. You see some of them on the screen here, like STEP or IGS or XT. If you're using any of these file formats for external collaboration, please type them in. If you're using any proprietary file formats, I would like to know about them as well. And feel free to ask any questions in the chat or Q&A around this. So while you do that, I would want to get into slightly more details around what kind of granular access controls Seclore helps to allow or disallow. For some of you, I see here in the participant list who are already initiated on Seclore, this is not a new concept. We are essentially extending EDRM capabilities of Office, images, PDFs to CAD files. For some of you who are probably not initiated on Seclore, I would spend a couple of minutes just to take you through some of these. The security construct allows you to control who can have access on this information. It could be named employees, named suppliers, domains of suppliers, names of companies. At the same time, um, there is a good possibility that you may not really know who all should have access to this information. But you do not want to block them from doing that, but track whoever is accessing that information. That capability is also available with Seclore. Enforce granular access control on what they can do with this information. Read only, edit, print, extract to other formats. It's all possible through the security construct. There are two different dimensions which are seen as very, very valuable, especially with the Seclore customer community, which is the time expiry. It could be a defined time range where this information is accessible to the bunch of suppliers, or it could even be construct, which could say from now till the end of 2 weeks. It could be a relative time frame. This is predefined, but there can also be a dynamic access revoking in case you wish to do that. The current geopolitical situation demands that enterprises have control on which geographies can access their IP. The CHIPS Act and the refinement that has come in the last few weeks, as well as few other export controls, requires enterprises to clearly define a deny list to control access from specific regions. And this is something that Seclore will be able to help you do. Beyond these granular controls, tracking every interaction that happens on these files helps enterprises gain visibility into their supply chain. And this information can be put into a dashboard, can be connected to a SIM, can be connected to a reporting tool, or enterprises also use the Seclore's own model dashboard to be able to track some of these activities. I spoke about the dynamic watermark already, which helps to get to the source of the leakage. And the dynamic expiry helps to block access or change the granular access at any point of time in the project. This is about the granular controls and some of the stuff that I spoke about. Let me take a quick look at the chat or Q&A to see if we've had audiences requesting for a product walkthrough. Okay, I see quite a bit of that. So let me take you through some product visuals. This is an example of all the granular access controls and advanced permissions that enterprises can allow or control suppliers from performing. So it could be copying data into a different files, editing, printing, running plugins and macros, and screen capture as well. So all this can be completely automated through the Seclore SDK and APIs. So the screen is more of a visualization of these capabilities, but some of you may not even be able to see this because it could be completely embedded into your workflows. Like I mentioned, the neutral CAD formats can be opened and accessed across multiple applications. So here there's an example of a design of a turbine, which is opened up in 2 applications. There is a dynamic watermark running on the screen from the bottom left to the top right, information on who is the user accessing that file at what time, and much more information can be put in the watermark to get to the source of the leakage in case there needs to be. If someone tries to take a screen capture, a screen grab through any of the snipping tools or the keyboard shortcuts, Seclore will block that. The screen goes automatically blank, and the screen grab output is a blank page. Any interaction that happens on this file, like I mentioned, is tracked. This is a sample view of the activities that suppliers may have performed on a file that is being tracked. Now, this information can be extracted out, and we can create some reports on top of it. The owner of the file or the enterprise can go into a file and revoke access to that file. And this would mean that the file, wherever it is downloaded across the world, even if it is offline, the next time someone tries to open that file, that user will not be able to open it, and that activity will be recorded as well. Like I mentioned, all activities on the protected files are recorded, even the country of access. This can be modeled in the Seclore dashboard, as you see on the screen, or we have seen many of the enterprises use this data and feed it into their own Power BI dashboards or their own custom dashboards. So an example of a dashboard here, if you see in the center top of the screen, a view of all the domains who have accessed the files or the CAD files in this case, things like Gmail, acme.com. They may not be authorized vendors or registered vendors. And this information will help to get a view of how long this or complex the supply chain is. Plotting across regions, getting a view of which activities the users have performed on that file. Looking at this list, I could see print activities happening on these files. And I will be forced to think on whether I should be providing access to print to any user or any domains or not. We have had enterprises who use this data and build their own dashboards. Is an example of a dashboard which some of our customers are creating based on the information that we provide. This information can be used to go deeper into high-risk suppliers, projects, or even region-wise views. Seclore SDKs can be used to automate control actions like revoking access, changing permissions if needed in the dashboard based on the workflows of the enterprise. Just to wrap all this information up, we spoke about CAD security, neutral CAD security. The consistency and the scalability of security in manufacturing enterprises typically comes in with automation, and security is no different. Seclore's automated security capabilities, either through out-of-the-box connectors or easy-to-use SDKs, help enterprises integrate with PLM and PDM systems, file servers on-premise or on cloud, collaboration mechanisms like SharePoint and Box. Working with DLP systems is also very easy. Just integrate with DLP and make sure that any CAD file that goes out of the enterprise get automatically secure protected, and other custom or in-house or out-of-the-box, out-of-the-shelf vendor management products as well. The main differentiator of Seclore is the support for multiple CAD applications for the universal or the neutral CAD formats. This allows suppliers to not change any of their workflows, not really learn something new, to be able to work on secure files and sensitive information and continue having the same productivity as before. To summarize, the Seclore's offering, which is the EDRM for neutral CAD formats, helps OEMs and enterprises to increase visibility of IP in the supply chain, definitely mitigate risk to a considerable level, collaborate without really thinking about the repercussions of leakage, and all net put together maximize the revenue coming from intellectual property and innovations. So with this, I'll take a pause. I'd like to summarize and conclude the information that I wanted to share today. If you need any more clarity, if you want to have more conversations, or just reach out for more clarity, please write to hello@seclore.com.
Great insights, Prakash. Let's go ahead and answer some questions. We have a few great questions here. So one of the questions I want to chat with you about is, how exactly does it work with distributed stores? So for example, when such files are not necessarily on the cloud, how does that work specifically, Prakash?
Great question, and thanks for putting that up. So the construct or the technology is based in a manner where it's a client-server architecture. Whichever environment the CAD files land up in, at the time of opening of that file, there's going to be a dial back to the server, and the server could be on-premise, on cloud, depending upon what is the preferred infrastructure of the enterprise. The policies are managed on the server. And like I said, at the time of file open, there is a query back to the server to compute the access control, access permissions for that user, and they get enforced wherever the file is being opened. So the files could be stored in cloud, it could be stored on the user's machine, it could be an on-premise setup. Everything happens in real time at the time of file access.
Okay. And so along those lines, is the metadata appended to the file or in a standard format, or what format is the journey of the file across the supply chain stored in?
So the file format is retained. The CAD file format, which is the neutral file format, is retained. So it will continue to be a step file throughout the journey. The metadata is in the header information of the file, but that's just for to identify the file. All the information around the security is in the server. So like I mentioned, every time there is a file access, a query using the file identifier is made to the server to compute the permissions and enforce back wherever the file is being accessed from.
Okay, I see. How many CAD applications would you say Seclore supports? I know it's probably too many to name.
Yes, it is. The most common CAD applications, be it the SolidWorks family or the Autodesk family, is something that Seclore supports already. Even the Siemens NX World. Now, the technology is built in a manner such that adding a new application is an incremental work to do. All we need to do is set up some configuration in the backend and make it available.
Oh, great.
What we wanted to do is start with an 80-20 rule. The most common applications seem to cover almost 80% of the market. So we'll be able to support all of that right away. And if any incremental need is expected, we can easily add that.
Gotcha. And let's do one more question here.
Sure.
This scenario I was thinking about a little bit, and I saw someone kind of hint at this earlier as well. So let's say the supplier, for example, uses Autodesk, right? AutoCAD and a vendor, and they may also be using SolidWorks
Uh-huh.
to buy a separate plugin and license for each app, or how does that work?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
So the first part is there's just one application, Seclore application, which will allow users to open up these files in any CAD application of their choice. So there's no need to have a separate plugin for any of these applications.
Okay.
Just one across any of the CAD applications. And the best part is these CAD files open in the native applications, which means that if the user intends to open this file in Inventor, the step files will open in Inventor. If they wish to open them in SolidWorks, it will open in SolidWorks, and no separate plugins are needed.
Okay, and that also includes the partners, their partners, all that. They don't have to buy a separate license or anything like that?
No, not at all. The consumption of Seclore protected files is free. They don't need any separate license. The receiver capabilities are completely free.
Gotcha. Excellent. Great questions, everyone. Alrighty, we'll go ahead and get this recording posted here shortly and send it out to the email that you registered with. Thanks, folks, for attending today's webinar. And if you have additional questions, feel free to reach out to our email, hello@seclore.com. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks for attending.
Thanks for joining. Have a good day.